Welcome back to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for ethical risk, bias, and effective governance. I'm joined again by Jeffery Recker, my partner in crime here, and I'm not sure what we're going to talk about. I think we want to talk about the EU AI Act, right? I think the EU AI Act is the buzz around town because they've now come to the agreement. We don't know what the final text is, but yeah, there's a lot of excitement around it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on again. Looks like this is becoming a bit of a regular thing, which is all right. Get me a little out of my comfort zone. It's all good. But yeah, no, I think the EU AI Act is a good one to talk on. That's like you said it spot on. That's where the buzz is at. That's the pain people worry about. You know, for companies looking for help. So maybe we can just do key takeaways from the EU AI Act. I'll poke your brain a bit, ask you some questions, and we'll just kind of free flow it and see what you got. How's that sound?
That sounds good to me. I mean, I think it's yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on it, and so I'll let you sort of fire away and see where we go.
All right. So let's just start super simple. What is the EU AI Act for somebody that's never heard of it? And then why is it important? Like, what's the big deal? Why are people concerned about it or excited about it?
Yeah. So the EU AI Act is sort of a very broad, overarching piece of regulation that obviously is at the EU level, and it's been worked on for a long time now. But the main idea, and it's just now being finalized, but the main idea is to be will end up being the global law that regulates the use of artificial intelligence. And so it will affect the entire world, similar to how GDPR really changed the whole landscape of privacy. The EU AI Act is poised to do that for artificial intelligence. And so as opposed to us talking about these little regulations popping up in here and there, I think that when we start thinking about compliance for your use of AI or development of AI, EU AI Act is going to be that sort of overarching regulation that most people will have to worry about first.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. When I talk to people and they're like, "Where do I start?" If they're in the scope of the EU AI Act, I'm just like, perfect place to start. There's so much to it. It's a massive legislation. You know, the the details can be overwhelming, but if you're looking at where I need to be in the future, in my eyes, that's where you need to be. Um, okay, dive in a little more on this. Who is affected by the EUAI Act? And maybe break down in different levels from not just the organizations that need to be compliant with the regulation, but then down the value chain, the individuals and the public, like who's affected, how.
Yeah. So it's going to be everybody, pretty much. Anybody who wants to operate in Europe is going to need to worry about the EU AI Act. So when I say everybody, I'm thinking companies now. So companies that want to sell their products in the European Union need to worry about this. So these are companies that develop AI products. And if they want to put it on the market in the EU, they have to make sure that they are conforming with these laws, the requirements of the EU AI Act. Similarly, people who are developing, companies who are not developing, who are using the AI, have to worry about this because this is an extraterritorial law. What that means is if there's somebody who's European, and even if you are a company in the US or Canada or something like that, and a European is going to be using that AI, then you have to worry about the act because it protects all Europeans, and Europeans, they're everywhere, and so just this is the same thing that happened with GDPR. They all everybody's got to worry about it if they plan on having any interaction with Europeans. So, in terms of the public, I think what you can expect is that there's going to be a change, just like the privacy laws changed the way we interact with data on the internet and the kinds of disclosures we get now about cookies and things like this. You're going to see a similar kind of change. So, as a just a citizen, somebody who's interacting with AI online, I would expect to see increased transparency around the use of AI. So if you're interacting with an AI system, I would expect that you're going to see notifications about that. You might see opt in and opt out in some cases for some of those AI systems, and so everybody will notice it. Everybody will be affected by this.
So if everyone's affected, could you then explain like what is AI? And I think that's not a simple answer in a lot of ways because there's a lot of different ways that an algorithm can be built. So if you could just kind of explain like what AI is and then how it's defined in the EU AI Act, and if are there any differences, and what do people have to consider for that?
Yeah. So the AI, so I should first say that the act is still being rewritten. Like there's a final version, there's an agreement, and there's some technical language that's being done. And by the end of the month, and maybe in February, we will see that final version. And so some of this may change a little bit. But in terms of the most recent versions, the definition of AI, they followed the OECD's definition of AI, which is quite functional in nature. So if you contrast this to and we've talked a lot about on this channel about the New York City Local Law 144. The definition of the automated employment decision tool that they have is really focused on like machine learning as a technique, and which is sort of machine learning. It really is the underpinning of AI, what most people think of as AI nowadays. But this is different. They are really talking about an AI system as one that essentially takes in data, does something with that data, and produces some kind of inference or some kind of output that is functionally useful, either for making some sort of decision or just doing something like a generative AI would count as that. And they're less worried about the internal workings there. And I think in general, if someone just has never interacted with artificial intelligence at all, or don't even know anything about it, which would be surprising nowadays, but if you haven't, you can really just think about it as a machine or an algorithm that does something that we kind of would normally attribute to human intelligence, like making some inference about a person or an image or a piece of text, or generating something, planning something out, doing something that you would normally attribute to human intelligence. So Google Maps, when you plan a route, in many ways that could be considered artificial intelligence.
Okay, so if algorithms are all over the place and it can be many different things, how does that how is that considered in the EU AI Act? Like uh, we've heard of like different risk levels, right, with the EU AI Act. So I'm wondering if you could break down a bit how different algorithms would be affected, and then also would that have any impact on people down the chain?
Yeah. So, I mean, good point. Like the risk levels are. This is a risk-based regulation. So there are certain requirements that either a developer or a user of these AI systems would have based on what risk level the system poses. And so they have different tiers, the highest being prohibited, like you literally just can't use it. And this is the prohibited would include things like remote biometric identification, sort of in the wild, and in particular, you can't just willy-nilly have like cameras that are just doing biometric identification of people unconstrained in the wild. and the only certain actors can get away. There are some exceptions for law enforcement, but they're very strict. That's one that would be considered prohibited, and there are a couple more. Certain kinds of emotion recognition would be considered prohibited as well in certain contexts where you're making really consequential decisions based on that. And then there's a high risk is the next level down. Now, prohibited just means don't do it, and the fines are big there. Like it's up to like 7% or something of your global annual revenue. But high risk is where a lot of the requirements come in. You can have a high risk system on the market, and high risk systems are there's a whole list of them that would include things like use of AI in education, in hiring and promotion, things like medicine, insurance, things that are kind of seem obviously high risk, where there's a consequential impact if it gets something wrong. And that's where most of the obligations are. And then there's sort of a low risk category below that where there's some transparency sort of obligations, but there's very little. And those are kind of deemed okay. But the high risk is where most of the meat of the EU AI Act is.
So, okay. So with these high risk algorithms, they have uh, all this stuff that they have to do to get compliant with the law. And I think the main thing people would be concerned about is a conformity assessment for this regulation. Can you explain what a conformity assessment is and how an organization's going to get one?
Yeah. Well, this is really relevant for us. I mean, because we are, we're aiming to be one of the bodies that will actually do these assessments. So a conformity assessment it kind of comes in two flavors. There's one that is just sort of an internal assessment. So it's like there's a number of requirements for high risk systems. Things that like you need to have a quality management system that has certain features. You need to have a risk management system that has certain features. And when I say certain features, there's a lot of features. There's a lot of things that you have to be doing in terms of mitigating risk around the use of AI. There is ongoing monitoring. There's technical documentation you need to produce. There's a lot. And so you could do an internal assessment where you say, okay, let's look at our system. Let's look at our controls. Do we have a quality management system? Do we have a risk management? And then we will have like this attestation. We will say that we conform to all of this. And you'd write something up saying, we conform to this. We've done everything. And that's an internal conformity assessment. And that, in some cases, that is going to, probably in many cases, that's going to be enough to put your tool in the market, let's say, or to use a system. The other case is an independent third-party conformity assessment. And so this is something that has been around for a long time in Europe. If you buy a washing machine in Europe that was built in America, it had to go through a conformity assessment process to make sure that it was okay to be sold in Europe. So it's very akin to that. And this is where a third-party independent body, a conformity assessment body, will come in and check that you have done all of those things, that you have the quality management system, you have the risk management system and technical documentation and all of that. And there will be a mark of conformity that will be granted. And those third parties can also require extra things. It's so they can come back and say, oh, you said you were testing your system 6 months later. Let's make sure you're still testing your system for these sorts of things. And so that's a heavier lift. Now, the details of which is which, like which system can get away with having an internal assessment and which one would have to have a third party, that's the details that I think are being worked out currently in the law, and we'll be keeping a close eye on what the result is when it's published.
So I'm curious, especially since it's not finalized. I'm curious if you could speak to timeline, like, and if you can, because I think there's a spectrum, right? Just kind of speak to timeline. Where do companies need to really start worrying? When do they have to start preparing?
Yeah, I think so. I think the answer to the last part, which is when do you need to start preparing, is now. I think that's it. So the in terms of when the rubber really meets the road, I we're gonna get the final, not the final, but the at least draft final uh, of the sort of the text sometime later this month or early next month. They're working on it now, and so this will come out. And so companies will have sort of this is the final version, and it's the meshing of sort of the versions that were created by the European Commission and the European Parliament, and so that's all getting finalized and squished together after the trilogue process. And so we'll have this sort of final text where there might be some tweaks potentially later, but it's pretty much done. And so now companies can start getting ready and preparing based on this finalized version. Uh, Prohibited systems they're gonna sort of roll it out a little bit. Prohibited systems will uh, that will come into effect around 2025. Okay, so the next year, not 2024, but the 2025, and the requirements for high risk systems are likely to come into effect 2026. Now, in terms of preparation, people need to start now because the requirements are pretty onerous, and I think companies need to start thinking carefully about how aligned are they currently in terms of their own internal processes, if they have them, with what the text is saying, and start ticking things off and getting these critical systems in place, infrastructure in place, the controls in place to eventually satisfy it by 2026 for high risk systems.
I'm curious if you could speak to like how much. Actually, you probably couldn't even speak to this. How much an organization could do this on their own, or if they should go out and find help? What kind of risk they might run into by not being compliant and not doing it correctly?
Yeah, I mean, so the risk is pretty clear. If you deploy like a prohibited system where it's prohibited and you didn't know it was prohibited, and and that's like 7% of kind of fines. This is GDPR plus fines. This is a lot of money. For high risk systems, if you are not compliant, you can get up to 3% of your global revenue, annual revenue, in fines. Again, when you think about really large organizations, that's a lot. And if you're non-compliant, now the question about how do you need help? I think the answer is probably yes. I think it's not easy to navigate this. I think that they should start even without getting external help. Like I think if there's a company listening now that hasn't done anything yet, I think immediately you need to start inventorying your AI systems and figuring out which one of them might fall into the EU AI Act and which may not, and figuring out what kind of controls you have in place currently and really start mapping out where you need to be. But that's a heavy lift, and a lot of people are asking us to do that, for instance, because it is a difficult process to really think about where are you getting the most ROI on your efforts in terms of where are you going to focus, because you don't want to like just start throwing controls together and it not be super relevant or effective for compliance with the law. And so I think getting some outside help in that area can save a lot of money.
Yeah, that's great. I'm wondering if you could actually expand upon that. Talk more about like the steps an organization should take to get compliant.
Yeah. Okay. So we have like an official list of things, and I won't go through the official list of things. I will just talk generally here. Not generally. I'll talk specifically, but I'm gonna go through a kind of a logical order. The logical order is you got to find someone to be responsible for this. That's like step number one. And this is, we teach AI governance courses here, and I always say that all of these internal controls are really just made up of people, the things that they do, and the tools they use to do them. That's like any kind of internal structure within an organization, and it's no different than for AI governance. So you need people, you need things that people do, and you need the tools they use to do it. So the very first thing you need is people. So there needs to be a person or a group of people that are going to be responsible for figuring out compliance with the EU AI Act. So designate somebody. That has to be somebody who it's either their primary job, or if you're a small company, it's part of their job. The next thing that that person needs to do, or that group of people need to do, is the inventory process. You got to know where you have these AI systems. Now, inventory is split between internal tools that you produce yourself. So it could be a company that literally that's part of their products is AI. So you need to know which systems are being used. Then there's also ones that you procure. So ones that you develop, and then there's ones that you might have procured from outside sources. So from a vendor, let's say. You need to know all of those too, because there are requirements for users, not just for developers. So you need to know that. And then there are also sort of ancillary uses of AI, which you may not even realize. So you need to look through your whole tech stack. Things like Grammarly or Slack or Notion, they have AI built into them now. Like all of these sort of software tools that you don't necessarily think has AI, you need to know where all of those are, because you need to manage that risk that you're using AI without having considered it, or according to regulation. So inventory is the next thing, and that inventory process has to be thorough. So once you have this inventory process, the next thing is scoping whether these systems are going to be in scope for the EU AI Act. Are they going to be high risk? You need to start thinking about classification. This is probably where you need to start bringing in external help potentially, because it may not be obvious whether it is or not. And part of the reason is that it is risk-based, and you probably will have to start doing risk assessments. So you can either just do a quick scan and say, these are definitely high risk, and let's start working with those. Or you can try to go deep in each one and really try to pick apart really carefully which ones are high risk. But you need to have some tiering system where you know that these are likely going to be in scope, these are probably not in scope. Once you have that basic triage, then you move on to the risk assessment process. And so then you need to start looking a little bit deeper into what are the actual risks associated with this. Now, this is where you need to start documenting things, because this is going to be part of your requirements for the EU AI Act. So you need to start implementing a risk assessment and a risk management system. Now, this is a lot of work. Now, that's just the beginning, because after that process, and you have a pretty clear idea about which systems you're using, what are the main risks associated with them, then you need to start thinking about mitigations and human in the loop and documenting all of that stuff. But if you haven't gotten to that point by let's say the end of this year, you could be in serious trouble, because there could be systems that are in scope and you won't have enough time to implement things. So at the point of the categorization after the inventory, that's where you need to start thinking about, do you need help to start categorizing these and start doing risk assessments for them. But at the very least, those first 3 steps need to get done fairly soon. Hopefully that wasn't too much detail for people, but that's really the temporally, that's the order I would do things in.
Yeah, that was great. I was just thinking this would be a good thing where we could break down in a future episode, like the steps in the process an organization should consider and take. But I think that's a pretty good wrap on this conversation right now. I can't think of too much else to add to it. What I will say is, I think we're going to do quite a bit of these lunchtime babblings, talking about and dissecting the EU AI Act and all of the little details. And so if people have things that they want to know about, you want us to answer to specific aspects of the law, how to do things, please just let us know. Leave them comments, reach out to us, and we'll do our best to answer it.
Yeah. And thank you for coming to either watching or listening to Lunchtime Babbling. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you could like and subscribe, we'd love that. And thank you very much for that. And if you're listening on a podcast, then thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.